Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all ready to relax and learn how to make crystal clusters using watercolor pencil. The two main points of focus today will be drawing 3D shapes and also learning how watercolor behaves. And we're going to put those two skills together to create these crystal clusters, which I absolutely adore making. And if you're new to watercolor pencil is a really great place to start because it gives you a little more control over how much color and water are on the paper, as well as where that water and color go. All right, to get started, let's briefly go over the materials we're going to need for this project. I like to use this watercolor paper. It's 140 pound. I also have a couple of round brushes, a bigger one and a smaller one, and some water, of course. And I always like to tape down my paper with washi tape. And of course, we can't forget the watercolor pencils, which are the stars of the show today. I actually inherited this kit from my mother, who is a lifelong artist and art teacher. This kit is Walter Foster, and it's so old. She had it sitting on her shelf for years and was like, "Do you want this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll give it a try." So you don't need to get the kit or anything, although I might try this project book sometime. Anyway, the point being, the pencils that are actually in this kit are by Faber-Castell, and it's a pretty standard brand for art supplies, and they're solid and really good, stand the test of time, obviously. And today I am going to be doing amethyst for my crystal cluster, so I chose purple and magenta. Make sure you have a pencil sharpener, you're going to need that, and a paper towel. So I think that's all the supplies. Let's get started on the project. So to start this project, I'm going to begin by outlining the crystal cluster. And I'm going to outline it using the violet color I selected because that would be the primary color in an amethyst crystal. And for the general composition, I want the cluster to look kind of like a bouquet in a way. So I usually start with like a short crystal in front, and then we'll kind of build off of that. For the crystals themselves, I'm basically drawing triangles on top of rectangles. To make it 3D, I'm drawing a more narrow adjoining triangle and then drawing a parallel line down from the outer corner of the adjoining triangle. And that gives you a 3D effect. Here, let's try that again. I'm going to draw a triangle, like so, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw an adjoining triangle that's a little bit narrower on either side. On the left point of the front triangle, I'll draw a line that angles down and inward, and I'll draw one that parallels that on the outermost point of the adjoining triangle. To add additional facets to your crystal, you can draw a V or an A or a line down the center of your rectangle. And one really helpful thing to keep you going through this project is to know that it is perfectly acceptable if your crystals are not symmetrical. These are natural crystals, let's say, and so they're going to have natural variance. So don't worry so much about things looking perfect, just focus on getting a feel for drawing 3D shapes. Also, remember that your crystals can be wide and tall, wide and short, narrow and tall, narrow and short, medium size, whatever, there's no perfect way to do this. So our outline is done. Let's move on to some shading. For the first part of the shading, I'm going to continue on with this violet watercolor pencil that I've been using. And I'm just going to lightly shade parts of each facet. And I am going facet by facet because it allows me to follow the angles. So when I have a triangle, for instance, I can start at the tip of the triangle and have strokes that are kind of radial and go out and follow that facet. And it ends up giving you really smooth coverage. I'm also leaving some white space in each facet because I want areas of highlight and shadow. Now that I've got pretty good coverage with the violet watercolor pencil, I'm going to take my magenta watercolor pencil and I'm going to color over the top of some of the violet that's there, and I'm also going to fill in some of those white spaces. One last thing to note when shading is to keep it lighter than your outline because you want to keep that definition in the outline once you add water. Something I really love about creating these crystal clusters with watercolor pencil is that they don't really come alive until you add water, so you have to trust the process. So I'll show you right now. Let's add a little bit of water. All right, I've loaded my small round brush with water, and I'm going to go ahead and apply the water the same way I applied the color, going facet by facet. And you'll notice that as I apply the color, the spots where I had only purple, or where I had a little white space, or where I added magenta over the purple, they're all popping out. You see that color variance, and it kind of gives this impression of light being reflected off of a crystal. And, as you're doing this project yourself and applying water to all the different facets, this is a great opportunity to observe how watercolor behaves. For example, something you'll probably pick up on pretty quickly is that watercolor involves a lot of blending. And the more water that you apply, the more you can blend the colors. But it can get tricky because if you add too much water, suddenly the water's taking over and it wants to flow everywhere. So you might have water flowing into places you didn't intend for it to flow, and combining colors you didn't intend to have combined. So it can become really messy. And sometimes that's great and beautiful. I know sometimes with the abstract art that I paint, I want it to be a little messy. I want the water to take over a little bit. But it just depends on what you're trying to create. So watercolor pencil is really great because it can slowly give you a feel for that. And you have color in very specific spots on your paper, and then you can slowly apply small amounts of water just to see how much is too much water or too little water, and you have a little more time to adjust. So after applying water to all the facets of my crystal cluster, I do like the way it's looking, but I want to intensify the colors a little bit and also add a little more definition back into those facet lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrace the facet lines, and then I'm going to go in and just shade a little more with my violet watercolor pencil and my magenta watercolor pencil in areas where I just want a little more punch of color. And then I'll go back in with my small round brush and reapply a little bit of water to bring out that color. And so I'll check back in once that's all done. And if you're doing this at home, I encourage you to do the same. See where you want to bring out depth in your crystal cluster and shade in some more colors, or if you want more definition in your facet lines, go ahead and retrace those now. All right, the second round of the crystal cluster is complete, and I really like the vibrancy, so I'm going to move on to creating the base of this cluster. For the base of the cluster, I'm going to create a little mound, and it's going to be composed of a bunch of tiny little circles that I'm going to make with my violet watercolor pencil and my magenta watercolor pencil. And to start, I'm going to be making a rough outline with the violet circles and then continuing to fill that in with violet circles and magenta circles. All right, I'm liking the coverage that I have, so I'm going to take my larger round brush with some water and then just lightly blend these circles together. And you'll notice how there's still some remnants of circles left behind, but the purple and magenta colors are surrounding those circles. Now that the crystal base is completely colored in, I'm going to take my violet and magenta pencils and just make some more intense dots. They're little punches of color. And I will note that this is still a little bit wet. So if your paper's a little bit wet, the color is going to be intense to begin with. And I'm going to add a little more water as I go so I can have varying spots of color intensity. And yeah, feel free to play around with that, and you can have a lot of intense spots or just a few, but I think it adds some depth and interest. So I really like this part. All right, I think this crystal cluster is pretty much complete. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button. I have to admit that when I was preparing for this tutorial, I went a little wild creating crystal clusters of my own, mostly because I just think it's so relaxing and it's a really quick exercise to do. And like I said, if you're new to watercolor, it's a wonderful way to acquaint yourself with the medium and have fun while doing it. So thanks so much for creating with me today. Until next time, take care.